So my name is Gary Boesgoed. I'm a professional engineer and a member of the Peepekasies First Nation. Over the last 30 years, I've been practicing engineering, been a project manager. I've worked with over 100 First Nations, and in many of those circumstances, I was called upon to negotiate between parties, multiple parties in some cases. For the last decade, I've been involved in mega projects, projects up to $20 billion in value around the world. A lot of those projects have interactions with Indigenous communities with at least one First Nation stakeholder. So my background is in delivering projects as an engineer, as a project manager, and then as a business executive running one of the largest engineering and project delivery offices in Canada. We've created a course on negotiations. This course is designed for Indigenous people from the band office, from chief and council, from any Indigenous stakeholder to be able to negotiate with third parties that come to the community with a pipeline, a large mine project, a power plant, any sort of project that is in the traditional territory or on the reserve for that community. The idea is to arm the First Nations community, the Indigenous community, with the skills to prepare for, execute those negotiations, and follow up on those negotiations to ensure that maximum benefit falls to the First Nation or the Indigenous community. The idea of the course is to show examples of how other communities have had success and how I've had success in negotiations. But I can't resist the opportunity to also tell you about where I have struggled and failed at negotiations, and I think those are good examples for this class as well. So how else should I introduce the course? Well, I just want to anticipate course materials, courses, unique, support. Okay, I'll put a little more in there. Because the course is designed for Indigenous people, there's a number of examples that relate to laws around in development around Indigenous communities in Canada. Court cases, United Nations declarations, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the kinds of things that affect how we view our role in Canada and how corporations, governments, and others view our role in Canada. But as well, I think the practical aspect of the course is the psychology of negotiation, how to prepare for negotiation, and really just the technical aspects of negotiation. Besides that, there will be case studies that will allow students to test their skills, culminating in a major negotiation that will allow students to role play as a developer of a project and as the community affected by that project. Throughout the course, the readings and materials will be augmented by videos, by group work, as well as independent study. In addition to the technical aspects of negotiation, which could be applied in any negotiation, the course materials have also had a lot of things added to them that reflect the Canadian reality with dealing with Indigenous communities. And those include the cumulative effect of court cases, of duty to consult, duty to accommodate the First Nations community. As well, we've added truth and reconciliation and its impact on our relationships with our neighbors, and UNDRIP. And that United Nations declaration is often quoted, but not always understood by all the parties around a negotiation. So in particular is a current and emerging topic that I think will be of great benefit to the students. One thing that I'm putting a lot of emphasis on as a corporate executive, as a business executive, is how do corporations plan for negotiations? How does their culture work? How do they make decisions? How do they negotiate? I think it's important that we have an opportunity to scout, as my elders' friends put it, the opposition in a negotiation. That truly negotiations can go very well with proper background in understanding Indigenous issues. So the indigenization of this course is at least half the content that relates to content specific and of interest to Indigenous students. As well, we will explain how different structures and decision making occurs in First Nations communities and how those communities communicate their aspirations for many things in a negotiation, which could be as complex as participation in the business, could be about employment, about supplier relationships, contracting opportunities, or simply funding for projects that are needed in the community. All of those things will be discussed as part of the ultimate impact benefit agreement or other agreement that is made between the project proponent and the community. I think this course is unique in that the First Nations University has asked an industry person to come and deliver or design this course and perhaps deliver it. My background in 35 years of consulting and project management experience, delivering projects as a project manager, as an engineer, and then as an executive with teams delivering projects around the world is, I think, rare experience for a First Nations person. Combine that with having done over 100 projects with First Nations. I've hired or subcontract over 400 First Nations people. We've done projects with 80% First Nations content by working these unique partnerships on capital projects. We've worked supplier arrangements. We've worked contracting arrangements. So I think the course is unique both in terms of Indigenous relevant content, but as well as industry relevant experience that was used in the formation of the course materials, but also I think will be part of the delivery of the course. It'll be very practical in today's context. With the emergence of court decisions in favor of First Nations, with duty to consult and duty to accommodate, the level of influence that extends to First Nations in a project in their traditional territory has increased dramatically in the last 10 or 20 years. But the obligations have not necessarily corresponded with a growth in the resources to the First Nation. So we result in what's resulted is a lot of community leaders are ill-equipped in terms of training, simply not having enough time to engage with corporations in these negotiations. And certainly they haven't had funding provided for additional technicians to work in the band administration to handle these negotiations. Because of that, training becomes vital to arm the existing administration with the toolkit to handle these discussions, to understand where they're coming from, to be efficient, to understand when it's time to bring in technical specialists. I think we all recognize the need for lawyers in these discussions, but there are many other professionals that would benefit the community if they were allowed to be part of the community's negotiations. There's been much success with First Nations that had, as they put it, as much power on their side of the negotiating table as their opponent in the negotiation. So this is something that will prepare band administration to support Chief and Council and the community by knowing all of the tools and having some practical practice to be able to hone their skills in negotiation, and also to know that the team will bring all of the resources needed to make that negotiation a success. Chief and Council have limited time. They often have, as you know, many portfolios to manage in the administration and the management of the band. They have relationships that extend throughout the region, the province, and the country in terms of their responsibilities within First Nations government. That does not leave extra time for them to work with these third parties that come to the community. Yet the authority resides with Chief and Council to approve any agreements that are put in place. This challenge of limited time and resources, but ultimately the authority and obligation that Chief and Council have, presents a challenge and an opportunity to build that level of expertise in technicians, to provide a strong foundation of understanding of the relevant laws, to understand the possible mistakes and pitfalls that can occur, to understand that sometimes, while something looks like an opportunity and leverage with a corporation, that there are possible backlashes that come from some of the positions that the courts have taken, that corporations feel forced to do things that they would otherwise do in a true environment of collaboration and partnership. So I think the thing that this course can do for students, perhaps for you, is to allow you to have best access to the background materials, to the technical experts, and to the vocabulary and techniques of negotiating, and negotiating to the benefit of your community. Out of these negotiations invariably come renewed structures, renewed organizations, new development corporations, joint ventures, memorandums of understanding. We'll talk about all of those things as tools to help the community move forward with clear and direct language as to how the community will engage in these third-party opportunities in their traditional territories. As we developed this course, we found that we had an abundance of material around the psychology of negotiation, that a lot of what happens in negotiations that I've witnessed is that one side felt power. The other side felt desperate to win and to bring something back to their political leaders that was considered a win at some level. What we're trying to do with this course is to balance that negotiation, to be able to deal with the power that corporations bring into these negotiations, because they spend millions of dollars preparing for meeting with stakeholders. First Nations have huge obligations as the laws stand today, with little opportunity to spend those millions on preparation. Yet they're entitled to a lot of that preparatory information. So our goal in this is to do the best we can with meager resources to really engage people in some opportunities to fail in a safe setting, opportunities to be successful, and to work with a group of other students on helping each other be successful in this process. So I think it's a great opportunity to not change the playing field dramatically, but just to prepare in a safe setting for a very complex challenge, which is negotiating with all of the organizations that come to deal with Indigenous communities in Canada.